In Valor, lineage was not merely tradition, it was infrastructure. Birth announcements pulsed across the city's data spires in soft blue waves, while childless unions flickered in faint, apologetic amber. The palace itself was wrapped in orbital fertility rings, vast metallic halos that hummed with predictive algorithms, forever calculating the probability of heirs like gamblers who had mistaken biology for destiny. On the morning Sarahith was summoned, those rings glowed an accusing red. She stood beyond the inner walls, tall enough that the highest balcony brushed against her thigh. Even kneeling, she rivaled towers. Her long silver-gold hair spilled over her shoulders in radiant strands that caught the light of passing drones. Her features were elegant and elongated, sculpted with a precision that seemed almost celestial. High cheekbones, luminous skin threaded with faint bioluminescent currents, and eyes deep as folded galaxies. Everything about her emphasized scale, her hands broad enough to cradle entire market squares, her stride capable of crossing districts in moments. And yet the council's scanners focused on only one variable. Probability index, 0.03, announced the high genetician, peering at a hovering display as though it had personally insulted him. Statistically negligible. Sarahith exhaled slowly. The breath alone stirred banners and sent a flock of courier drones spinning off course. One of them rebounded from her shoulder and chirped indignantly before recalibrating. She almost smiled. King Orvin rose from his throne, a narrow man encased in ceremonial circuitry. "You were engineered for continuation," he declared, voice amplified by the palace acoustics. "And yet you produce none. The people must understand consequences." Consequences. The word hung heavier than gravity. Below the balcony, citizens gathered, their wrist screens already streaming the spectacle. Some looked up with curiosity, others with rehearsed disappointment. The kingdom loved a cautionary tale almost as much as it loved an heir. Sarahith straightened to her full height. The movement cast the palace into shadow. A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. She did not speak. Her silence unsettled them more than protest would have. The fertility rings above intensified their hum, recalculating as if perhaps sheer stubbornness might alter arithmetic. "You will be sent beyond the perimeter," the king continued, gesturing toward the distant crystalline frontier where failed terraforming experiments had sculpted forests of glass and rivers that glowed faintly at night. "Let your exile remind Valor that worth lies in continuation." A technician cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, technically worth can be quantified through multiple variables." Silence. A low laugh escaped Sarahith before she could stop it. It rolled through the square like distant thunder softened by amusement. The laugh was not bitter, it was incredulous. "You built orbital rings to measure destiny," she said at last, her voice resonant but calm. "And still, you think the universe fits inside a ledger." Several courtiers exchanged uncomfortable glances. One scanner beeped again, as if attempting to reclaim authority through sound alone. The king's jaw tightened. Escort protocols. From the outer gates, mechanized sentinels advanced, their chrome limbs gleaming. They were absurdly small beside her, though they marched with theatrical severity. One nearly tripped over a cobblestone and corrected itself with exaggerated dignity. Even in humiliation, the pageantry bordered on comedy. Sarahith lowered herself, placing one hand gently against the palace wall. The stone warmed beneath her touch, responding to the bioluminescent currents in her skin. For a fleeting moment, the city's light synchronized with her pulse. Then she rose, turned, and stepped beyond the gates. Each stride carried her farther from the data spire's glow. The air shifted as she crossed the perimeter field. Surveillance drones hesitated at the boundary, reluctant to follow into the unpredictable frontier. Behind her, the city resumed its rhythm, blue announcements pulsing, as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. Ahead lay the crystalline wilds, where glass trees sang in harmonic frequencies and abandoned satellites occasionally fell like metallic rain. Sarahith did not look back. The exile meant to diminish her only emphasized her scale. Beyond the walls, there were no scanners, no amber warnings, only open sky vast enough to match her gaze. Somewhere within the city, the fertility rings recalculated once more, confused by an anomaly they could not process. A giantess who walked away laughing. Beyond Valer's perimeter, the land no longer obeyed symmetry. Crystalline trees rose like frozen lightning, their branches chiming softly as charged winds threaded through them. Rivers carried faint turquoise light, residue from ancient terraforming arrays that had miscalculated atmosphere and instead invented beauty. Sarahith walked carefully among them, each step deliberate, mindful not to fracture what little harmony existed out here. She discovered quickly that exile came without instructions. There were no glowing directives in the sky, no algorithm whispering recommended routes. For the first time in her engineered existence, no system monitored her pulse. The silence was enormous. She found she preferred it. On the third night, as twin moons tilted across the horizon, she sensed movement below, a small heat signature weaving through the mineral undergrowth. Her first thought was drone. Her second was something less predictable. She lowered herself slightly, silver-gold hair cascading forward like a luminous curtain, and peered between the crystal trunks. Selim Rhine had been tracking plasmastags all afternoon when his wrist AI announced, in a tone far too cheerful, "Warning, unclassified geological anomaly approaching." "That's not how geology works," he muttered, adjusting the dial on his pulse bow. The ground trembled gently. He looked up and up again, and then a little farther up. A colossal figure shifted beyond the trees, illuminated by river glow and moonlight. For a suspended second, he considered that dehydration had finally become ambitious. "AI," he whispered, "define anomaly." "Large vertical." "Attractive," the device replied after a pause. "Probability of courtship, statistically complex." "Helpful as always." Sarahith lowered one vast hand into view, palm open, fingers broader than his entire camp. The gesture was cautious, almost apologetic. Selim did the only reasonable thing available to him. He bowed slightly and hoped the universe appreciated irony. "Good evening," he called upward. Her voice came a moment later, warm and resonant like distant thunder softened by wind. "You are very small." "I've been told," he replied, "usually by mountains." The corner of her mouth curved. The sound that followed, soft, almost surprised, shook loose a cluster of metallic leaves overhead. She knelt carefully, bringing her face nearer. Up close, her scale became undeniable. Her luminous skin carried faint bioluminescent threads that pulsed gently beneath the surface, and her eyes held depth that suggested starlight had taken residence there. Even her features seemed elongated with grace, every line emphasizing magnitude without diminishing delicacy. "You are not afraid," she observed. "I am," Selim admitted. "But I'm also curious." Fear and curiosity often travel together. They complain a lot. He activated a small field projector, casting a neutral glow between them so neither would be blinded by reflection. "You're from Valer." "I was," she said. The word was simple, but it carried weight. "Let me guess," he continued, lowering his bow. "They measured you. They measured what they valued. And that didn't include everything else." Her gaze sharpened slightly. "You speak boldly." "I hunt plasmastags for a living," he shrugged. "Bold is cheaper than armor." A gust of charged wind rattled the crystal canopy. Sarahith shifted instinctively, angling her immense frame to block the brunt of it from his camp. The movement was subtle but deliberate. Selim noticed. "You didn't have to do that," he said. She tilted her head. "It seemed inefficient to let you blow away." "Appreciated." Silence settled between them, not heavy but thoughtful. His AI flickered again. New classification, companion scale entity, recommendation, continued dialogue. Selim rolled his eyes. "See, even the machine thinks we should talk." Sarahith studied the tiny device, then him. "Your kingdom called me failure." He sat on a fallen shard of crystal, gesturing upward. You're currently serving as weather protection. That's already more useful than half the council. A pause, then laughter. Real laughter this time, rolling and bright. It echoed through the forest, startling nocturnal drones from their perches. The tension that had followed her from the city loosened slightly, like circuitry finally disconnecting from a faulty source. I was sent as Mockery, she said quietly. Then they miscalculated, Selim replied. Mockery doesn't usually cast a shadow that long. He rose and approached her lowered hand, placing his palm briefly against one luminous finger. The contact was brief but intentional. Out here, value works differently. Survival, partnership, good jokes, that's the frontier economy. Her bioluminescent threads brightened faintly at the touch. Above them, a forgotten satellite streaked across the sky, burning quietly as it re-entered atmosphere, another relic of a kingdom that trusted machines more than choice. For the first time since Exile, Sarahith did not feel observed. She felt seen. The frontier did not keep secrets for long. 3 nights after Sarahith's laughter rolled through the crystalline forest, the sky answered with a different sound, precise, mechanical, humorless. Selim was in the middle of arguing with his wrist AI about whether dried plasmastag meat qualified as culinary ambition when the first surveillance flare ignited overhead. Ah, he sighed, glancing up. We're being audited. Above the tree line, sleek retrieval drones descended in geometric formation, their hulls etched with Vaylor's sigil. Behind them, a larger carrier craft unfolded from stealth like a metal flower blooming with bad intentions. Its underbelly pulsed with containment fields calibrated for giant-scale restraint. Sarahith rose slowly, her towering frame eclipsing the river glow. The bioluminescent currents beneath her skin brightened in response to the electromagnetic disturbance. She did not reach for a weapon, she had none. Instead, she stepped forward, placing herself between the descending machines and the fragile sprawl of Selim's camp. They recalculated, she said quietly. Of course they did, Selim replied, strapping a compact EMP coil to his belt. Nothing irritates a system more than an unscheduled variable. A drone projected the king's emblem into the air. By decree of Vaylor, subject Sarahith is to be retrieved for corrective evaluation. Corrective, Selim muttered. Do they come with an apology update? The first drone fired a tether, an elegant arc of charged filament meant to bind at colossal scale. Sarahith pivoted with surprising grace, the filament snapping against a crystal trunk instead. The impact sent harmonic vibrations through the forest, turning trees into a ringing chorus. Careful, Selim called. These woods are temperamental. Another drone adjusted trajectory. Selim triggered his EMP coil, sending a localized pulse that scrambled its stabilizers. The machine wobbled midair, emitting a confused chirp before colliding gently with a riverbank. Firmware from last century, he commented. I've seen smarter kitchen appliances. The carrier craft responded by lowering gravitic anchors, columns of shimmering force intended to pin Sarahith in place. The ground around her feet hardened under the pressure. She inhaled, steady and deliberate, then shifted her weight not in resistance but in rhythm. The crystalline soil, already unstable from ancient terraforming experiments, responded to her movement. Fracture lines spread outward in controlled arcs. You're dancing, Selim shouted over the rising hum. I am adjusting, she answered. With a final step, she redirected the anchor's force into the terrain itself. The ground rippled, refracting the gravitic beams at skewed angles. One anchor veered sideways, clipping the carrier's stabilizer array. The massive craft listed slightly, its polished symmetry disrupted. A new voice crackled through the projection field, King Orvin, sharp and disbelieving. You consort with a human, for what purpose? Selim cupped his hands around his mouth. Excellent question. We were just debating frontier cuisine. Sarahith's gaze lifted toward the hovering sigil. I was sent away as a reminder, she said, voice resonant but calm. Perhaps I have become one. The drones regrouped, recalculating threat parameters. Their algorithms flickered, attempting to reconcile data. Exile subject, non-reproductive, now demonstrating adaptive defense and cooperative behavior with a human. The numbers did not align neatly. Selim darted between crystal trunks, planting compact charge mines along predicted flight paths. You know, he called upward, if they'd invested half this energy into not being cruel, we wouldn't be having this conversation. A drone swooped low. Sarahith intercepted it with 2 fingers, catching it mid-descent. She examined the small machine briefly before placing it gently on the ground, where it spun in disoriented circles. It is very determined, she observed, like a bureaucrat with a clipboard. The carrier craft attempted one final maneuver, deploying a containment lattice that shimmered like a net of starlight. Sarahith did not retreat. Instead, she extended her hand toward Selim. He hesitated only a second before stepping onto her palm. The scale difference was absurd, his entire body smaller than one luminous curve of her fingertip, but the gesture was deliberate. "Trust me," she said. "Against my better judgment," he replied. She lifted him just high enough to reach the lattice's power node as it descended. With a quick adjustment of his EMP coil, Selim overloaded the node at point-blank range. The lattice flickered, then collapsed into harmless sparks that drifted like embarrassed fireflies. Silence followed, broken only by the distant retreat of engines recalculating elsewhere. Sarahith lowered her hand, setting Selim gently back on the crystalline earth. Above them, the projection field dissolved without ceremony. "They will return," she said. "Probably," he answered, brushing dust from his jacket. "But next time they'll need a better plan, and maybe a sense of humor." She looked toward the dark horizon where Vaylor's faint glow still lingered. The confrontation had not felt like defense alone, it had felt like correction. Not of her, but of the narrative imposed upon her. For the first time, the frontier did not seem like exile. It felt like territory. And somewhere beyond the perimeter, a kingdom built on rigid calculations struggled to process a new variable. Choice? Vaylor did not attack again. Instead, it watched. For days after the failed retrieval, orbital lenses lingered at the edge of the frontier, pretending to study weather patterns while clearly studying one towering anomaly who refused to behave like a cautionary tale. The fertility rings above the capital dimmed from furious red to an uncertain amber. Algorithms ran through sleepless cycles, attempting to reconcile a contradiction. Exile subject demonstrating resilience, alliance, and, most offensive of all, contentment. Sarahith stood at the boundary ridge when the formal transmission arrived. She did not kneel this time. She did not step back into shadow. Selim sat cross-legged on a crystal outcrop nearby, polishing his pulse bow with theatrical seriousness. The projection of King Orvin flickered into existence between them. "Sarahith," the king began, voice less amplified than before, "your continued resistance destabilizes public order." Selim raised a hand. "We prefer the term creative reinterpretation." The king ignored him. "Return, and we will reassess your designation." "Designation," Sarahith repeated the word slow and measured. "You named me failure, you named me reminder. You named me absence." She stepped forward, her immense shadow falling across the projection. "I no longer accept your vocabulary." The silence that followed stretched like orbit. "I was engineered to extend bloodlines," she continued, voice steady but resonant with something deeper than defiance. "Yet here I extend shelter, I extend protection, I extend choice. Your rings measure continuation of flesh. They do not measure continuation of will." Behind the king, advisors shifted uneasily. Data streams flickered. Somewhere within Vaylor, citizens were watching again, but this time the spectacle felt different. No banners snapped in triumph. No laughter rose in mockery. Selim stood and approached her lowered hand, resting his palm against one luminous finger as he had the first night. The gesture was small, almost absurd against her scale, but it was deliberate. "For the record," he called toward the projection, "I choose her, not for heirs, not for probability indexes, because partnership is better than policy. A murmur rippled through the transmission feed. The king's image wavered as though even the signal struggled with the concept. "You would abandon legacy?" Orvin asked. "I'd redefine it," Selim replied. "Legacy isn't always what you leave behind. Sometimes it's what you refuse to pass forward." Sarahith felt something shift within her, not physically but structurally. The exile that had once pressed against her like gravity now felt distant. She had walked away laughing. She would not return diminished. "I will not come back as symbol," she said. "If Valor wishes to evolve, it may do so without my humiliation as fuel." The transmission held for a long moment, then collapsed into static. Days passed. No drones descended. Instead, something subtler occurred. The fertility rings above the capital dimmed further, recalibrating under public scrutiny. Scholars reopened archives long sealed, rediscovering records of giantesses as terraformers, guardians, architects of climate and stability, not merely vessels. The narrative began to fracture, not violently but persistently. On the frontier, life settled into rhythm. Selim modified his camp to accommodate occasional tectonic shifts, as he described her footsteps. Sarahith learned to navigate the crystalline terrain with a gentleness that contradicted her scale. She no longer moved as though apologizing for existing. When storms rolled in from the irradiated plains, she stood firm and laughed at the thunder, daring it to compete. One evening beneath twin moons, Selim lay against a warm crystal ridge while Sarahith sat nearby, vast and luminous against the dark. "Do you miss it?" he asked. "The city?" She considered. "I miss nothing that required my shame." He nodded. "Good, because I'm not great at court etiquette." She smiled, the expression subtle but radiant. "Nor am I." The sky above flickered as an old satellite burned harmlessly through atmosphere, a relic of a kingdom that once believed control guaranteed order. It disintegrated quietly, leaving only a brief streak of light. Sarahith watched it fade and understood that she had not been sent away as a mockery. She had been released into scale. The humiliation meant to define her had instead clarified her worth. Not measured, not assigned, chosen. Beside her, a human hunter who had once survived by instinct now stood by conviction. He no longer joked to deflect fear. He joked because he could. He had chosen something larger than himself and found that scale did not diminish him, it expanded him. Beyond the ridge, Valor's glow softened, uncertain but no longer absolute. Under open